Welcome back to the Asia Political Review. Today's topic: are we really close to a breakthrough deal in this stalemate between Iran and the United States? And if you look at this reported memorandum, it should be understood not as an end of the war, because no one really ends wars or wins them, but it's a demonstration of Iranian bargaining power. That's a tough thing to say, but at the center of this is why I'm saying, to a certain extent, Iran gained an advantage, is the Strait of Hormuz itself. One of the most strategic waterways in the world, because so much of the world's oil and gas pass through the corridor, and the threat of disruption or a halt in energy supply gave Iran such tremendous leverage. So, in that sense, this memorandum is not about peace. It's about what side needed to end the crisis first. And that was clearly the United States. And mind you, that was a crisis that it created on its own. So the Strait of Hormuz is so important because it turned geography into political power. Look, Iran didn't need to control energy markets. It just simply needed to influence them. It made it possible for the uninterrupted movement of ships to become uncertain. That uncertainty raised insurance costs. It increased the costs of shipping, the risk of shipping, and it put immediate pressure on energy prices and all the price of goods and services that we all enjoy. So that is coercive diplomacy at best. And coercive diplomacy translated to maritime vulnerability, and that was a bargaining chip. So if the Strait of Hormuz was a requirement, that's not a technical arrangement. That is a concession that was extracted under pressure. So this explains why the memorandum seems to favor Iran more than the United States. Look, the United States and Trump were under pressure to restore maritime stability, the thing that it created on its own, to contain the energy shocks that the war started by Trump caused, and prevent the conflict from spreading further. Apparently, the United States didn't seem to understand the lengths that the Iranian government would do to survive. And by contrast, the Iranians could allow the crisis to escalate, to widen, before it accepted terms that brought it real benefits. So the difference in urgency really matters. So here again, the United States needed to have this de-escalation, something it had prior to the war beginning, than the Iranians did. So if the reported terms are accurate, that means sanctions relief. That means freer Iranian oil exports and a reduction in military pressure. So what does Iran get? Well, it has to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. It was opened before the war began, and it accepts further limits on escalation. What does the U.S. get? Only temporary stability. Iran gets economic relief, it gets political validation, it gets domestic political legitimacy, it gets to say, hey, we played a game of chicken with the United States, and the United States, the world's superpower, the most powerful military in the world, it blinked first. And if you just want to look at the escalation is one thing, but the nuclear dimension strengthens my reading of this further. So if the memorandum says, hey, we're going to impose a limit on your enrichment or a pause in escalation, that's not weakness, because temporary constraint is a choice. It buys Iran time. It reduces the risk of retaliation, and it preserves their core capabilities while the sanctions pressure eases. So, in that sense, the Iranian government didn't need to give up its long-term position in order to gain short-term concessions. So this is why the Strait of Hormuz was so important to the larger logic of the deal. The waterway wasn't really about tankers. It's a geopolitical asset. Its ability to threaten instability gave it a leverage that was far beyond military capacity. And for the United States and all these other dependent countries that are import dependent, the United States a little bit less so. That priority was preventing disruption before it affected oil prices, before it affected shipping routes, before it further damaged inflation and industrial supply chains. So it wanted to get out of the mess, meaning the United States, get out of the mess that it itself created. So the restructure, the memorandum, it looks like Washington was the more urgent party. So if the U.S. wants shipping to normalize, the markets to calm, and escalation to fall, it had to negotiate with the side that had the ability to disrupt all three of those things, right? That's the thing that gave the Iranians the upper hand. The Iranians didn't need a total win, right? It just simply needed the ability to make the alternative to negotiation too costly for the other side. And clearly, the disruption in oil markets, the disruption in supply chains, the cost of inflation pushed the United States to the negotiating table. So look, on the question of who won the war, who came out on top in this reported peace deal that's supposed to go into effect on Friday, the answer clearly is Iran. It used the Strait of Hormuz as a bargaining tool. It converted regional instability created by the United States into leverage, and it forced the United States to prioritize de-escalation. So this memorandum is understood as a kind of limited accommodation shaped by Iranian leverage, rather than, say, a balanced agreement between both sides. The United States got one thing: a temporary reduction in risk, right? But Iran came away with so much more. A recognition that it can use the Strait of Hormuz, a critical choke point, in any future negotiations. And it will probably come out with favorable terms. So there's one takeaway from it. It's this. This memorandum is going to be shaped as a peace deal, but it's not. It just simply shapes that Iran had the upper hand because it turned the Strait of Hormuz into diplomatic leverage, and it made Washington pay for the stability, the political stability, the regional stability that it needed. It caused the instability, but it made it pay for stability. And we'll see how this thing turns out. As they say, the peace deals come and go. The memorandum could stop, and we could be back at the negotiating table tomorrow. We could have a disruption in what we call a ceasefire. This thing could draw out for months. But from what it looks like now, if the memorandum holds, who's the clear victor? It's Iran. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe.